All right, we're back here doing the first article of the Constitution. Sorry that you don't get to see my bright smiling face. Hopefully you live. But we're going to be reading Article 1 here. This is all about the legislative branch. Whew, that was a mighty thick pen tip there. So this is the legislative branch. What does legislate mean? Well, legislate means if I can get my pen here to work. To make laws. Wow, I'm always so embarrassed by my handwriting on this, but you'll just have to deal with it. That's not how it looks in real life, again, I promise. But the legislative branch is the one that makes laws. Now, as we read this whole Constitution, you've talked about the three powers of government, the legislative, the executive, and the judicial. We're going to read here about each one, and the Constitution starts with the legislative one. This is the group of people that makes laws. So, Section 1, the legislature. All legislative powers herein granted shall be vested in a Congress. So Congress is both groups together. So Congress of the United States, which shall consist of a Senate and a House of Representatives. So there's two groups, and we're going to learn the difference between these two groups. The fancy word that they use for that is bicameral. That's just a fancy word that means two chambers. So the House or the legislature. Oh, sorry for that bell. The legislature in the United States has two different chambers. One of them is the Senate. One of them is the House. Both of them together are called the Congress. So make sure you kind of know what each of those are when we use those words. So the first one we're going to read about here is the House. The House of Representatives. Now this was meant to be the one that was closer to the people. So this is the one where there were more representatives, and this should be, a group that's a lot closer to the people. So let's make a list here of the characteristics of the House. So the House of Representatives shall be composed of members chosen every second year. So they serve, so what is it? Let's see, one of the things is they serve for 2 years. So these ones are supposed to change a lot. In fact, every election we have, even when it's not a presidential election, every 2 years, we elect new representatives. So these ones should change a lot. These are the very fluid ones. These are, they're supposed to come in, make some rules, and then go back home and be normal people again. That was the idea. So they're chosen every second year by the people of the several states. And the electors in each state shall have the qualifications requisite for electors of the most numerous branch of the state legislature. So that's how they choose. Now, no person shall be a representative. Now, here's the qualifications. No person who shall be representatives who shall not attain the age of 25. So representatives have to be at least 25 years old and been a citizen of the United States for 7 years. So they have to be 25 years old and 7 years a citizen. And who shall not, when elected, be an inhabitant of that state. So they also have to be a state resident. So those are the qualifications to be elected to be a representative. 25 years old, 7 years a citizen. You don't have to be a citizen your whole life. You could be an immigrant, but you have to at least be a citizen for 7 years. And you have to live in the state you're being elected for. You can't live in California and be elected in Idaho, for instance. Now, as we read this Constitution, the copy that I've given you here, anything in parentheses has been changed by an amendment. So let's read this and see what's been changed. So representatives and direct taxes shall be apportioned among the several states which may be included within this union according to their respective numbers, which shall be determined. So this is how they're going to count how many people live in your state. So it shall be determined by adding the whole number of free persons, including those bound to service for a term of years, and excluding Indians not taxed, and 3/5 of all other persons. So when you're adding up how many people your state has, now let's do this quickly. When you're adding up how many people your state has, Each free person equals 1. Each Indian equals 0. And each slave equals 3/5. So that's how you add up the total of the people living in your state to determine how many representatives you get. Now, there's a lot of people who especially make a big point of this one right here, that slaves only somehow counted as 3/5 of a person. They say, oh, look, the founders were racist because they made the slaves only 3/5 of a person. But there's also the other people who said, well, the slave states, only white people could vote at this time. Slaves couldn't vote. So the slave states, they would get huge amount of votes if they counted all the slaves. So they actually, a lot of people say that this they were trying to do to help stop slavery by not giving slave states so many votes. They didn't want to count all the slaves as a person so that the slave states would actually have less people in it and not have as many representatives. But this is how you determine how many representatives you get, is you have to count up all of the people. Now, we can see here that this says the previous sentence in parentheses was modified by the 14th Amendment, Section 2. We'll get to the amendments in one of the other lessons. But again, this 3/5 clause, people talk about that all the time and say, well, they were racist. They only thought slaves counted as 3/5 of a person. But perhaps actually what they were trying to do is give slave states that would have voted for slavery less votes by not counting all the people in those slave states as much. So a couple ways of looking at that one. Now, the actual enumeration shall be made within 3 years after the first meeting in Congress of the United States, within every subsequent term of 10 years. Now, this is where we get the census. Every 10 years, the government has to count everybody to determine how many representatives each state gets. So that's where the census comes from. The Constitution actually tells us that every 10 years we have to count everybody. So every 10 years, in such a manner, let me mark that down because, you may not write it yourself if you don't have me write it down for you. This is the census. In such a manner as the laws shall direct, the number of representatives shall not exceed 1 for every 30,000, but each state shall have at least 1 representative, and until such enumeration shall be made, the state of New Hampshire shall be entitled to choose 3, Massachusetts 8, Rhode Island and Providence, Plantation 1, Connecticut 5, New York 6, New Jersey 4, Pennsylvania 8, Delaware 1, Maryland 6, Virginia 10, North Carolina 5, South Carolina 5, and Georgia 3. So these last ones down here at the bottom is for the very first group of the House. They said since we can't count right away and we want to start government before we can count, these are the ones that start. So this clause right here, all this stuff right here is kind of these startup clauses that don't apply anymore. This was just to get it started. They would start out with that many, but after that they would count it for 10. Now I forgot to look. It says you shall not have more than 1 representative for every 30,000. For every 30,000 here. I need to look and see what it is right now, and I forgot to look. Shame on me, but I'll look it up and I'll give it to you in the next lesson here. But this says how many representatives there are per people. When vacancies happen in the representation from any states, the executive authority, so this is, who's the executive authority? This is the governor. I don't know if I can write it in here. Governor. The executive authority thereof shall issue writs of election to fill such vacancies. So the governor of each state gets to decide when is there a new election to choose a new representative. And this happens if there's a vacancy, if somebody resigns or dies or is removed from office. So the House of Representatives shall choose their speaker and other officers. So they get to kind of choose how they work. And shall have the sole power of impeachment. What is impeachment? Impeachment means that they are, that a government official is accused of a crime and it goes to trial. That does not mean they're guilty. For instance, recently President Clinton was impeached. The House of Representatives impeached him. And when President Clinton went to trial for that impeachment, he was not found guilty and not removed from office. But the House of Representatives gets to decide when to accuse somebody of a trial and accuse somebody of a crime and go to trial when it's a government official, most notably the president. But they can accuse other government officials of crimes and bring them to trial. So make sure that you remember that it's the House that can accuse them of crime. But impeachment does not mean they're guilty. It just means they're accused, and then they will have to go to trial to see if they need to be removed from office. That's the only thing, if they are guilty, that's the only thing impeachment can do is remove from office. That's the power of impeachment. All right, so we have the legislature. Let's review here quickly. We have the legislature made up of two groups, bicameral groups. We talked about the House. What are the requirements for the House? Make sure you know that. How they count the people, how they used to count the people to determine how many representatives you have. That's been changed by the 14th Amendment. And then how you fill a vacancy and what it means to be impeached. Those are the things that you should make sure you know. All right, let's move on to the next section.